Hello and welcome to this episode of Carnegie Insights. And now we'll look at the top developments in the defense space that happened in the last 2 weeks. So I'll just quickly put a few things on the screen for you. So the things that I'll talk about today are the Army's restructuring, that it has what's called the Rudra Brigades and Bhairav Battalions. We'll just take an overview of that. Then we'll come to the Sudarshan Chakra Mission announced by the Prime Minister on August 15th from the ramparts of the Red Fort. What does it mean? And the third one is the clearance given by the Cabinet Committee on Security for the 97 additional LCA light combat aircraft Mk1A jets. And finally, we'll take a look at the India-China border situation. There was the 42nd round of special representative talks 2 days back on Tuesday. So, and there were some important announcements there, some decisions that, with respect to the boundary resolution. So we'll take a look at that as well. So let's begin with that. The first one. So the army chief, end of July at the Kargil commemoration, so announced that the army is looking at Rudra Brigades and Bhairav light commando battalions. So what does it mean? So these are essentially meant to be agile formations for, quick offensive, quick, action if something like Operation Sindoor were to happen again. And to draw a context, the army has been for some time, for the last at least 3, 4 years, 5 years now, planning something called a integrated battle groups, IBG. Or in fact, the process was often referred to as the IBGization of the Indian Army, or what meant was the brigade strength, which is about 3,000, 3,500 soldiers. Each of them was supposed to be a self-sustained, fully functional unit which can function and fight on their own. That was the idea, but that's been pending for some time. So recently, just as I said, end of July, the Army Chief General Upendra Dwivedi announced that he has just given approval for the Rudra all-arms brigades. So what do they mean and how are they different from the IBGs? So Rudra Brigades essentially will be, again, they are supposed to be reasonably self-contained units or brigades within the division. So a quick screen on how the army hierarchy functions. So as you see, there's army headquarters on top. Then you have the army commands, as you keep hearing, Northern Command, Eastern Command, Western Command. There are 7 commands. The army command is a static command. And below that is the corps. The corps is a mobile formation, is the largest field formation. And under that comes the division, then the brigade, and then the units and regiments, as we are quite familiar with. So each of them typically, a corps has, say, 3 to 4 divisions, typically 3. A division has 3 to 4 brigades, and each brigade has 3 to 4 units or regiments under them. So that's how the structure goes. So here the idea is at the brigade level, which is a fairly functional mobile unit. The idea is to either the IBG or the Rudra Brigades. It actually centers around the brigade. So this will actually and in the Rudra Brigade, the concept within the division, each of the division has all elements of it. Say, for example, there is infantry, there's armored, there's artillery, there's support elements, air defense, etc. A brigade depends on, typically in a normal scenario, a brigade depends on other elements or elements of the division for support. Here, each brigade is supposed to have elements drawn from other units in the division to make them reasonably agile and, ready to move. So this does not mean any new rising or new force accretion. They'll only do it within reorganizing the existing reserve just within the div level. And a few brigades will be formed initially as test units, and, that process it flows through a process. You can't, you test it, you validate it, and then you spread it out further across. That's what the Rudra Brigades are. Then the Bhairav Light Commando Battalions. Again, these will be different from the Special Forces units as the para units, which are known or quite famous for. These are essentially tactical units within the brigade and unit, which will give the agility to undertake tactical specific operations to, behind enemy lines if required also, etc. So these will be, again, self-contained within the brigades. So that's the case. Let's just briefly see what an IBG is before going to the second issue. An IBG was or is intended as slightly bigger than the typical brigade, about 5,000, going up to about 5,000 odd men and women. And it is supposed to be headed by a major general because it has all elements contained, the IBG. It's supposed to be, the proposal, as at least as it is supposed to be headed by a major general rank officer. And this needs some financial elements, financial allocation as well, which is why a proposal has gone to the Ministry of Defense a couple of years back, in fact, for clearance and a government sanction to create them. And it was already extensively test-bedded and war-gamed by two of the Indian Army's corps, the 9 Corps and the 17 Corps. 9 Corps, which actually looks at the western border, 17 Mountain Strike Corps, which is focused on the LAC or China. They have test-bedded it. The concept has been validated. So the proposal is now waiting for clearance. That's where it is. And in fact, there was a statement by Army Chief in January this year, where he said, when he was asked about the timeline for the IBG formation. So he said, I'll quote here, timeline is difficult to give because whenever the bureaucracy gets involved, it will take time. We are hopeful that by 2025, we'll either create the IBG or cancel this project completely. So this was in January this year. And since now, a few months down the line, now we have these Rudra and Bhairav battalions, brigades and battalions that have been announced. Also, in a way, it comes post-Ops Sindoor, the military confrontation with Pakistan in May. Now to the next issue. On August 15th, Prime Minister Modi announced Sudarshan Chakra Mission, where he said he's actually set an ambitious timeline of 10 years to, foolproof the country in a way, protecting from neutralize enemy threats, etc. So it essentially means a broader air defense shield in a manner of speaking. But an air defense shield is not necessarily, what, kind of seen in movies, a broad shield, thing shooting down. An air defense essentially functioning in layers. I'll give a schematic for that. Here, what you see on screen is a multi-layered air defense as how it functions. So there is a long-range air defense, medium range, short range, very close range, and each of them is taken care of by a different weapon system and a different function. And all of it is backed by radars, sensors, which track things in real time, and also integrated into a common chain. What again, to go back to Ops Sindoor, which was became quite popular. The IACCCS node of the Air Force and Akash Tir system of the Indian Army. Each of them are their own networks into which their systems are plugged in. And these two are again integrated. The Akash Tir is integrated into the IACCCS. And so you have a real-time functional multi-layered air defense system over the Indian airspace. So you can't protect every single inch of it. So you identify priority targets, vulnerable areas, and then you put up a shield around them. So that's how typically our air defense system functions. So when the Prime Minister said Sudarshan Chakra, so it will also kind of encompass multiple layers, multiple levels. And now, in fact, in the last few years, warfare has taken to a new several notches higher with the drones and counter drones. Air defense guns have got a new lease of life in that sense because they are the best cost-benefit wise to shoot down small drones, quadcopters, as again, what we saw the Army's air defense guns coming to action during Ops Sindoor. That's the drone and counter drone part of it. So you also have jammers. There's a range of options of how you shoot down drones. Again, the schematic here kind of gives you a broad sense of how the system functions. And I'll also quickly show you what do we have now. Because the Prime Minister said it will be an indigenous effort. Indian scientists, engineers will do it. So yes. So if you see the table here, on your left is what the current system is. On the right is what is currently actually under development. So again, now on the left, they're all in a way household names post-Ops Sindoor because we have heard of them so much and they've actually performed extremely well. There's 400, the MRSAM, which is a joint development with Israel, the Akash indigenous short-range system, the Spider, again, Israeli origin, the Visharad, which is the very short-range air defense system, or also called as man-pads, because a single person actually shoots it, holds it on the shoulder and fires it. These are in a way, the last resort. Then you have close-in weapon systems, air defense guns, many of them which we heard quite a bit in the last 3 months. These are already existing. So what is under development? Already a lot of projects are in the pipeline. I mean, at various stages of development, in fact. For example, there is a indigenous ballistic missile defense in the works. Phase 1 is already kind of close to fielding or about to be fielded. And phase 2, which can tackle incoming ballistic missiles up to 5,000 kilometers range, is also under development. Then there's an upgraded Akash Prime, again, indigenous one, but meant to upgrade it to perform better in high altitude environment, because for India, that's a critical requirement. And then there's a QR SAM, indigenous QR SAM, also under development. Then a Visharad has been tested multiple times. Both the QR SAM and Visharad have been tested multiple times already. And then several close-in weapon systems are under procurement, and a couple of them are under development through indigenous, under various make procedures through private industry participation. So we should see them actually fructifying in the next few years. So this deadline of 2035 is actually quite a reasonable deadline given the number of programs underway right now. So we'll go on to the next one now. And as I said, the third one, the Cabinet Committee on Security, the CCS, chaired by the Prime Minister, gave the final approval for the procurement of 97 additional light combat aircraft LCA Mk1A jets. This adds to the existing 83 ordered already. In fact, the first of the delivery should happen probably in the next month or two, because there's a slight delay in the program. This should happen very, very soon after some delays, engine delays, developmental delays, and so on and so forth. So why is this important? I'll just give you a quick schematic of the numbers. What you see on the screen is the number for the squadron strength of the Indian Air Force, the fighter squadrons. So what you see is 31. Next month in September, this will drop to 29 because the MiG-21, the 2 squadrons will be retired. So Indian Air Force will actually be down to 29 squadrons, while the sanctioned strength is at 42.5 squadrons. And especially given the current threat, both from Pakistan and China, the number of 4th generation fighter jets, both countries are fielded. China has 2 5th generation fighters in service. It has already unveiled of an advanced 5th generation jet, literally 3-4 months back. So the neighborhood is actually quite contested in terms of fighter jets, and the advancement in them, in fact. So that's a huge deficit to fill. And what we saw, the primacy of the Air Force in Ops Indore, while initially it was both Army and Air Force which took over the term target, the later 3 days, there was significant air power that is involved in reaching long range precision strikes. So that's really important. And that's where this comes in. This 180 LCA Mk1A fill a lot of space, not just replacing the numbers of the MiG-21s and also 7 other jets, which will also soon be going out. So eventually, there are already 40 LCA Mk1 in service. These 180 are capable ones in terms of significant capability additions as asked by the Air Force. And there's also LCA Mk2, which is under development, which will actually be a bigger aircraft than the current LCA. Much bigger, much more capable. And that, as of now, as of current timeline, and mid to end of next year, it should roll out mid next year and take first flight, probably by end or the first quarter of 2027, probably, somewhere between that. And that also is expected to be about, as the graphic says there, about 120 odd jets. And the LCA Mk2 will be another important milestone while the Mk1 Alpha gets inducted in numbers, because that will actually be replacing the MiG-29, Jaguars, Mirages eventually. So that's a lot of space to fill. All this happening while Indian Air Force and India await a 5th generation fighter, which is the AMCA, Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, currently under development. The timeline is about a decade from now. So that's where, some speeding up of the process has to happen. Deliberations are on. So we'll probably get back to this in our future episode in a more detailed manner of where we go from there. So I'll move on to the next issue. So this is the final issue for this episode. The 24th round of special representative talks. There's between India and China on the boundary situation, boundary resolution, in fact, happened on Tuesday. From India, it's NSA Ajit Doval, and from Chinese side, the SR is their foreign minister Wang Yi. He was here in New Delhi before he even talked to Afghanistan and then Pakistan. So the SR mechanism has been is actually the established mechanism between India and Pakistan to resolve the boundary issue, the line of actual control, because there is no commonly agreed delineation, demarcation of the border between the two countries. The alignment of the LAC is disputed, and it has been going on for some time. As we are aware, 2020 we saw a major standoff, which is technically speaking underway even now. So the 2020 standoff in Eastern Ladakh, which is defined as the western sector of the LAC. So just for a quick ground fact sheet, what you see here, the LAC is about 3,455 kilometer long border, divided into western sector, middle sector, and eastern sector. Western is Ladakh, middle is the Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, eastern is Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim. So India and China actually so far have only managed to exchange maps with respect to the middle sector. The western sector, in fact, they tried when it happened in 2002. The western sector, they tried to exchange maps, but China said India was expanding its claims, so that process fell through. So even today, the only place both countries exchanged maps is with respect to the middle sector. So now, in fact, on that, there's an important announcement that came out from the SR talks, which actually says setting up an expert committee under the WMCC mechanism is under the Ministry of External Affairs. That's a diplomatic channel for the boundary issue. So they have agreed to explore early harvest in boundary delimitation to the Indo-China border areas. That's an important understanding to reach. And they also re-emphasized faith on the 2005 agreement. There are multiple agreements between India and China on the border issue. So 2005 and 2013. They actually guide the conduct of the troops and on the ground and how face-offs happen. If, say, each side patrols to their areas of perception, that's where the problem is. There are differing areas of perception on the LAC. So each side patrols to enforce their claims, and when they come face to face, there's a face-off. If sometimes, as we have seen many times, periodically in the past, when there is a bit of a friction, some flare-up happening, that's a standoff, and things have been resolved. So 2020 was, in fact, on that sense, much wider standoff at 7 friction points on the line of actual control. And last October, the two sides reached an understanding to disengage from the last 2 friction points, which is Depsang and Demchok. These were actually quite tricky points, but finally a breakthrough was reached, and disengagement is moving away from the friction points. 1, 2, both sides have also agreed to resume patrolling, which is in a way coordinated patrolling, so that each side informs the other side when they're patrolling to avoid a face-off. But that said, now what remains on the ground with respect to the standoff? The patrolling resumption has happened only in 2 places of the 7, on Depsang and Demchok. All the other friction points, earlier friction points, Galwan, Hot Springs, Kogra Hot Springs area, and the Pengongso, North Bank and South Bank, the patrolling has not resumed yet. Disengagement has been done, and there is a moratorium on patrolling. So that has to first happen. Now that there is a template for these the last 2 points, it's relatively easier to work a mechanism out. That's one. And then resumption of patrolling. And then these are de-escalation, which External Affairs Minister Jaishankar also referred to in his remarks in his meeting, after his meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister. De-escalation would be essentially moving back troops to the peacetime areas or as they were before the 2020 standoff. That's going to take a tall order in terms of negotiations, because both sides have built up a lot of infrastructure. China has already had infrastructure. India built to match that because there's a lot of gap in the infrastructure on the 2 sides. That's 1. 2, There are a lot of advanced weaponry positioned forward by both sides. So how do you resolve that? To what extent can you take that back? That's going to be a tricky negotiation. We'll have to wait for that. So that's from the standoff point of view. So connected to that, especially for the standoff, the mechanism of resolution has been the corps commanders, which is from the Indian side, the 14 Corps Commander based in Leh. And the counterpart, the Chinese counterpart on the other side. So they have been the mechanism where all the decisions with respect to the standoff resolution were taken. So an important point here is, this says the two SRs have also agreed on the creation of general level mechanisms in eastern and middle sectors, in addition to the existing mechanism in western sector, which essentially means they will have a 3-star general level corps commander and equivalent level mechanism on the other sectors as well, the middle sector and the eastern sector. That's in case there is a flare up, something comes up, that actually quickly sets in to resolve before things go out of hand. That's an important understanding in that sense. So also the boundary delineation, as I said, only for exchange, even the exchange of maps has not happened for the western and eastern sectors. So there are 3 steps here: delimitation, delineation, and demarcation. Demarcation comes down to once everything is done on paper, you actually go on the ground, mark the territory or mark the boundary physically. That's the demarcation. Delineation is marking it on the paper. First, you agree on where to draw the line. Before that comes delimitation. You kind of work out the modalities of how you do it. So in a way, what the line says, early harvest, that's a key phase. So there are some points which are really tricky. There are friction, there are mutually agreed disputed areas. That's going to be trickier. But there are some areas where there is relative overlap and easier to work out. Probably this actually means that. So pick those areas, low-hanging fruits, if you to call them, work them out and reach an understanding, do delimitation first. So that's in a way kind of what was used to be said in the past, that the entire LAC has to be settled in one go. This is actually kind of builds a leeway into that, because it's been trickier to work out. It says, okay, now let's take the easier points, work them out, and then probably go to the bigger, trickier points later. So that's an important understanding at that level to resolve the larger boundary issue. And also the last point, before we close, use the border management mechanisms to carry forward the process of border management. So in a way, the standoff, some level of military diplomatic understanding at different levels has kind of been set in, especially in the western sector or the eastern Ladakh. So in a way, that kind of now forms an important template in case things were to, if something escalates again. So, and just to close, as I said before we finish off, the last point, these are 2 points. One, SR agreed is on the larger boundary resolution. Well, we also have the standoff to resolve, which is currently at the phase of resumption of patrolling and de-escalation. So there are 2 things. There's a lot of positive momentum in the India-China bilateral relations in the last few months, especially so. And we should see this carrying forward, because the Prime Minister is soon going to China for the SCO summit. So we'll have important progress there, hopefully, because he's going to meet his counterpart bilaterally, fingers crossed, expected. So we can expect some positive momentum and direction from the top leaders to take the forward process. So on this note, we'll wind up here. Please subscribe, watch, give your feedback, and we'll come back to you. So thank you.